about imitating some of the foods that they can eat.
I like that you said the word imitating, right?
Imitating.
We're not planning to perfect it right away. Hello, Ms. Deniz.
Hello.
If you can tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey to AIFS, how long have you been with us, and some of the key parts to your role as a resident director in Budapest.
Hello, everyone. It's nice to have everyone here. I have arrived to Budapest as a student to do my graduate degree in this wonderful city. And I'm originally from Istanbul, Turkey, and previous to Budapest resident directorship, I was the director of the Istanbul program. And however, my journey with Budapest, Hungary started about 15 years ago. So I arrived as a student, like most of our AIFS students are. I did not know any Hungarian. I did not know that much about the country, although I've heard great things, hadn't traveled there before. And I became a student in one of the bigger universities here. And immediately I started to pick up a few words in Hungarian and getting to know the culture, the wonderful music, the great food. And finally, about 2-3 years ago now, when the opportunity came up to start the program in Budapest, I gave that a go. We are here at Corvinus University. It is the largest state university in Budapest and possibly the second largest in Hungary. And we started as a fairly small program, but we have grown quite drastically before COVID came to us. And we are really looking forward to getting back and welcoming more students to the program. I'm a political scientist by training, so that was the attraction of this unique country. But then there's so many things that students can study here.
Just to rewind a little bit about your background. So you're originally from Istanbul. So your native language is not even English, right? So it's Turkish? Is that the correct language? So Turkish. So you learn English on top of that. And then you go to Budapest, which is completely different from Turkish. And you said you picked up a few words. And how long did it take you to learn the language and be fluent?
It is a language that's quite unique in Europe. It's sort of an island to itself. It is surrounded by all the Slavic languages and German to the north. However, it's a very musical language.
Yeah.
If someone is good with music, with tunes, you can really start to get a sense for some of the expressions in the words quite quickly. Again, those who come to Hungary with a bit of Spanish or Italian is not going to get any help with Hungarian because they're not at all connected. But that's the whole idea about being immersed in a country, is that this is the best way to pick up a very unique language that not too many people in the world speak. And I hear back from students who have talked to certain employment prospects.
Yeah.
And when they mentioned they studied in Budapest, it definitely attracted more attention than your Italys and Frances of this world, because it is such a unique destination. The language course that is offered at the university is a combination of language and culture. Mm-hmm. And at the end of completing that course, you have a basic understanding of the language. You can order your food. You can ask for, certain things in the shop. You can impress your friends and your parents about, showing them around, asking for directions. So basic survival skills can be had at about a semester length.
So when you say it's a musical language, did you kind of listen to Hungarian music in order to kind of pick up on things? Or when you say it's a musical language, it's just something that flows and is a bit more lyrical? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so this is a very musical country. There's a great folk music tradition as well as singing tradition. There's great music on the streets as well as in more elevated forms in the opera and the theater. And they're very accessible to students in terms of price and availability. However, I picked up the language by learning some folk songs that children learn.
That's awesome.
And certain expressions with the great music in tandem start to really, come to me when I'm on the streets and I'm expressing myself.
Yeah.
So that was definitely not how I learned English. Music is so related to language that gave me a certain advantage to kind of, find that parallel sense between language and singing.
What you said basically is probably a lot of what our students feel when they arrive to not just Budapest, but any of our programs for the first time. Just that overwhelming of like, how do I learn a language? Where do I start? Luckily, all of our programs usually have some kind of crash course. So the one that you had mentioned where students can kind of learn how to order their food or ask directions, are those basic building blocks to the Hungarian language. Is that a mandatory course during orientation, or is that something that they take otherwise?
The language course, which we call Hungarian for Beginners, is not mandatory. However, our students really like to take it because it is, again, a combination of a language and a cultural course. So they spend some time out on the streets, exploring the sites. They with the professor, they can go shopping.
Yep.
They do these shopping excursions so they can really practice what they hear in the class. So it is a really good combination of, exposure to the culture, exposure to the sites as well as the language itself. However, it is not mandatory. For those who are interested in, only really focusing on their majors and minors and don't want to spend time taking a language course per se, we also have a survival Hungarian in the orientation phase, which can give students some very basics about reading what they see, about the alphabet, pronunciation.
Yep. Okay.
And from there on, they get a little bit of a start, but they can choose not to concentrate on finding out more.
I like how it's called a survival course. Kind of puts you on the foot of like, yes, you will need this. And we always tell students, don't underestimate even the little bit of language that you learn in the beginning of a program if you don't continue it on through, an academic course throughout your semester. Never underestimate the power of knowing those few phrases, the dialogue. You can start with a local. Should a local know English and they see that you're trying, maybe they'll help you, maybe you'll make friends that way. So it's important. It's an important step in the right direction. What do you think it is that students are drawn to about the program, or what's special about Hungary that maybe we wouldn't find with, not necessarily not find with any of our other programs, but what's special about Hungarian and stands out to students?
Special about the Hungary and Budapest. I mean, Budapest is this upcoming city. Slowly you are really seeing a lot of interest in this less traveled city in Europe. It is neither small or large, so it is a very manageable size. There's a significant student population, so they're always going to find people, young people on the streets of Budapest that are not necessarily from Budapest, but who are studying in the city. Life is quite affordable here compared to some of the bigger cities in Europe, such as Paris or London, or even next door in Vienna.
Right.
So the student budget does stress quite a bit. You can really stretch your budget for not just the bare essentials, but to really spend on cultural events, to short-term travel during the weekends. Now we have quite a few budget airlines that can make these weekend trips possible.
Yeah.
To almost anywhere in Europe. If you want to be environmentally conscious and don't want to fly, you can take the train, overnight train, to Paris, London, or even as far as Stockholm, or all of those are quite possible to explore, making Budapest your base as a student.
So you have that affordability if you're studying, and your home base, as you said, is Budapest, but you do have easy accessibility to get to those major cities, those major tourist attractions, what have you, so you're not missing those out when you're living in Europe, which is really, really great. We did talk a little bit about academics, but if you can take us back to Corvinus University, tell us a little bit about what those programs are going to look like. Is there a class that is really popular amongst our AIFS participants, AIFS students, things of that nature? If you can just tell us a little bit about campus culture as well.
So Corvinus is a fairly large university in terms of its student size. Its main focus is on business management, finance, and certainly these type of majors. However, we've been adding quite a lot in terms of our social studies or social science and liberal education classes recently. Therefore, a student who is not studying business or economics or finance can find an interesting Central European history course or politics of the EU course or a psychology course or consumer behavior and psychology course. All of that would be available if they're not strictly focusing in business, but this is our strength. In terms of the real strength of Corvinus University is its high-rated program in business. So there's a American and European ratings in business courses, and Corvinus now has, since 2 years ago, has a fairly high-ranking business program in Europe. So, which would be desirable for someone who's coming from the US from a business degree, because they would find, equivalence of the American accreditation here in Europe. Excellent. So that is really the strength of the Corvinus University, but other classes outside of business are quite easy to find as well, and increasingly so.
It's a good program to opt into for students that maybe want to add a business minor. Maybe they are not necessarily majoring in business. You don't have to be a business major to take a business course if it's one of those lower level courses. But also on the flip side of that, if you are a business major, you don't have to take all business courses. You can kind of take some humanities and electives and whatnot. So there's a nice balance between the two. It's not all business. Can you tell us a little bit about what are the housing accommodations for Budapest? Is there more than one housing accommodation for students to choose from? How do you match roommates? Just tell us a little bit about what that might look like for students.
Depending, of course, students' needs, we can offer single occupancy versus double occupancy in small student apartments. They're all concentrated in this rather large student residence, but they are really very hard to call student residences for the sort of accommodation that is offered. They're really quite modern, quite luxurious.
Yeah.
In comparison to, some of the student accommodation you would find back at home in the US. And it's also possible to, it's a one-stop shop. There are lots of social areas to meet with friends, to do your studying, but also to do your laundry. There's a small gym that can be used free for the residents. It's fairly centrally located. So it's about a 15-minute walk from the campus.
Okay.
It is a one metro stop and one tram stop, depending on your preference, from the campus as well, if you don't want to walk, if it's raining or, if you don't feel like it or you're in a rush. So it's quite centrally located, but there's also, an advantage of possibility of accommodating single occupancy preferences.
Yeah, I've heard this about most of our European programs. The housing is going to be a step up, if you will, from that of an American dorm room with a bunk bed sort of thing. So yeah, I've heard they're very luxurious. You said about 15 minutes by walk or public transport to the campus. So yeah, it's a nice, easy commute. And that's something that the RDs will always cover during orientation, correct? Is just the commute from housing to campus.
Actually, when students first arrive, on the subsequent morning, we meet them at the residences and take them on campus for a campus tour. and the latter part of the day we do a walking tour of the city. So in those very first, let's say 12 hours to 24 hours, students really do get their bearings about how to, go around, explore the shopping possibilities in the area, and what are the scenic routes to the campus, because the campus is located right at the bank of the river Danube. Therefore, it is really quite a nice thing to walk on the street. It's a historic part of town, so it is really fun to sort of, take different alternative routes to the city.
Oh, for sure. And it's funny how like they arrive and then right away they're just, we give them all this information that they have to soak up for the rest of the semester term. It really gives students like confidence from there on out to know that they can navigate a city. Again, what are those key phrases they might need throughout the semester term? Can you tell us a little bit about what you guys cover during orientation other than just routes, things of that nature? Are there any cultural events that you guys do during that first week, or cultural events in general throughout the duration of the semester? If you want to talk about those.
Actually, we call it an orientation week because in that week there's something every day, and they're different. Some of our more informational sessions, the other are more cultural sessions.
Okay.
So we invite speakers who are either expats or former students to speak to the students about being, getting their bearings or cultural immersion in that first week. We also do a survival Hungarian session, which is a combination of both the language, but also, some of the tips about your first 2 weeks of your life in Budapest. We do an academic orientation, and we do a half-day culinary tour of the city. So students will start thinking about their favorite foods, exploring them, and more importantly, to how to acquire the materials to start cooking at home if that's what they want to do.
So in the housing, just to rewind back to housing, they do have equipped kitchens, kitchenettes, something of that nature?
That is correct.
That's really helpful too, because when you study abroad, you kind of get in the habit of like always eating out, always wanting to try the cuisine and never really challenging yourself to like, can I create this in the comfort of my own living accommodations? Do you find a lot of students will use the kitchens, or is it
absolutely
happy balance?
Absolutely. I think the proximity of some of the popular markets of the area to both the school and the housing is almost an inviting factor for students to pick up some of their ingredients. We also have a cooking class fairly early in the semester to show them the basics of Hungarian cooking and to adjust to both, meat eating, but also vegetarian needs.
Yeah.
So they will be given some of the sort of essential knowledge about imitating some of the foods that they can eat.
I like that you said the word imitating, right?
Imitating.
We're not planning to perfect it right away. Rewinding back to the meal plan and housing here, they're given like a debit card of sorts that is already preloaded, so they can use that at markets, grocery stores, restaurants, things of that nature.
So students can choose to have a meal plan. So they will have an allocated money to be loaded onto their foreign exchange cards that we give to each one of the students who would like to do that. Otherwise, they may choose to opt out of it, and in order to give them more budgetary flexibility. But this is a city where you can find fairly affordable food options, even on a student budget.
Okay.
So they can do that. There are several cafeterias on campus. If you're rushing in between classes, between buildings, that's also a possibility. But in which they can use their meal cards to purchase, lunches or dinners.
So they can kind of free range. If they want to cook one night, that's great. If they want to challenge themselves in the kitchen, they can do that. With the housing, is it international students mixed in those student residents? Is it locals? Or is it just AIFS participants? What's the melting pot of the housing look like?
So it's a good mix. It is US students plus students who come on the Erasmus European program, as well as Hungarian students who are living outside of Budapest and studying in Budapest. Hungarian students who are not from Budapest but who reside in this rather nice student residence. So it's a really good mix. It's an advantage not to be isolated somewhere that you, especially in these times, it is good to be around people that you can easily associate with, who can invite you for social events, even if it's within the building confines itself. You can organize events right there because there's a social area. But it's a good mix of both US, Hungarian, and other European students.
So in terms of the excursions for the semester, what do those look like for students?
So we have a mix of both excursions within Hungary, as well as excursions outside of Hungary. So within Hungary, we try to explore places that students would not normally go to, because most people know about Budapest, but they don't know about places outside of Hungary. And I personally really like, taking a nature walk or biking to the countryside. And those are all things that we include in our internal domestic excursions. We also have an excursion to Vienna. It's always a nice comparison between Budapest and Vienna. They're very similar, although they're also very different. And they can do that with us. And then maybe decide to go back to the city, which is only 2.5 hours by train. During the weekend, but we give them a very good start to explore this other great European city. We also have an optional excursion to Prague. We have a very busy program in both Vienna and Prague while students are there. We have great guides, local, who expose students to the places that they may then take their friends. But I'm personally very excited about the ones within Hungary because increasingly they've become sort of more easier to do, but students would feel a little bit lost on their own to explore yet another city or another natural part of Hungary on their own. And this is a great opportunity, this one semester is a great opportunity to get to know the country with people who have been living here or who are from here.
And this is a good question for you because you are an expat and you can kind of rewind in your mind, like when you first arrived for your own studies in Budapest. What are the locals like?
So in order to kind of break the ice, we have a program where we match AIFS students with Hungarian Corvinus students.
Awesome.
And from very early on, they get an exposure to Hungarian student life, and in some cases to life outside of Budapest, where in cases where these students are not from families that live in Budapest, they end up inviting our students for a short day trip to their own cities or towns that they get to eat, sample grandma's special cooking that are done, and they kind of break bread together in a family home, in a completely different environment than a student housing. So we have that. However, I'm not going to lie, that Hungarians are not the warmest people to make an immediate friends with. However, the saying goes is that if you have a Hungarian friend, they become friends for life. So the relationships take a while to start, but they're also very long lasting.
That's good to know. If students have an idea of how they should approach locals, maybe how they should kind of act when they're in somebody else's turf or space or what have you, good to know. So you take your time, but then they're kind of stuck with you for life. Excellent.
Exactly. I mean, I always tell students not to take anything personally. If people seem a little bit standoffish or cold, it is nothing personal. It's just a cultural trait you can navigate through, and sometimes you appreciate the respect of the privacy as well.
Do you find that when students try to use the language that you've kind of given them that survival survival course during orientation and they try to use a language, are locals pretty receptive to that?
Oh my, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Even if you just start the day with, 𝗟𝗘𝗧'𝗦𝗦, a good day, or thank them in Hungarian, 𝗟𝗘𝗧. I mean, that makes a huge difference. It's one of the biggest icebreakers that we might have with the people you meet for the first time, is to really venture into this unusual language, use a few words that you picked up in survival Hungarian or your Hungarian class, and people would really approach you differently in a much more friendly manner.
Going back to Corvinus for a second, are there student organizations that our participants can join into, volunteer programs if they were interested in volunteering while studying abroad, anything like that that's available to students to participate in? So
we are a very young program, but we did manage to set up a partnership with a non-governmental organization that works in education. And this is one of the things that our students really liked to become involved in, to be older mentors or older buddies to younger Hungarian students who come from less privileged backgrounds.
Gotcha.
To practice English with them, to help with their English language project. So our students can really get involved to know different parts of the society that they may not be normally exposed to. They really enjoy the opportunity to working with quite devoted members of this non-governmental organization, to design teaching plans with them, to learn how to play with students or younger students in English, and finally to become, older mentors to these young students.
But it sounds like you guys have some good wheels to the volunteer programs, even being a younger program. So that's really awesome to see. I do have what we call a speed round. Okay. I know you've seen this before. So we might overlap with some of the things we've already talked about, but I'm going to give you a word and basically think of a word in response to describe, your first thing that comes to mind when you hear whatever that word is. Food is our first one. So what's the first thing you think of when you think of Hungarian food?
Oh, paprika, which is the type of spice that you put in everything. Okay. It's not hot, but it gives this great taste, but also color, this bright red color that you add to food. Maybe the second would be special pastries that we have. This part of the world is famous with its pastries, and they're everywhere.
Is paprika something that you'll find in almost any dish? It's almost like a staple?
Any kind of meat dish would have paprika added to it.
And when it comes to the pastries, is this something that students might learn in that cooking class and try to?
Well, they get to make what we call 𝗟𝗘𝗧'𝗦, a Hungarian crepe. 𝗟𝗘𝗧'𝗦. And however, pastries are so bountiful that you could just go out and get a fresh one within 5 minutes to your waking time. So I think people would prefer that. And that's the typical Hungarian breakfast, is a Hungarian salty, savory pastry with some coffee, and you're good to go.
What is the coffee culture like in Hungary? Is it pretty wide?
So, fast coffee came to Hungary late. Coffee is more about time, and these fancy coffee houses that you spend the rest of the day in, but it's not a Starbucks.
Gotcha.
Or any of its equivalent. So it's more about socialization, but less about coffee on the go.
Okay.
But Hungarians are quite picky about their coffee. They like to, explore different types of coffee, but the normal coffee that we have is quite similar to an espresso or a Turkish coffee.
Strong coffee.
A strong one, yeah.
And I have to ask you this, because you've had both. What do you prefer, Turkish coffee or Hungarian coffee?
Well, we'd like to. I think I reached an agreement with Hungarian friends for over many years that Turks brought coffee to Hungary.
There you go.
So, however, after that journey, it took a life of its own, and I really don't mind having both.
So no preference, but it sounds like Turkey had a big influence on the coffee
influence on the coffee
in Europe and
Hungary.
Transportation. I know you mentioned we have a tram, so we'll talk about that in a little bit because I don't think we covered much of what that will look like for students. But first word that comes to mind with transportation?
The trams that run on both sides of the Danube. It's probably one of the most scenic routes in Europe.
Yeah.
So it starts from one district, travels all along the Danube on both sides of the river, and passes about 3-4 districts in a row. And then you could really stay both above ground, so you do a bit of sightseeing, exploring different parts of town, and get to places. So it merges practicality with sightseeing, and that's what I like most, rather than the underground, which we also have, or the fast buses that we also have. So
you have an underground and a tram, is that right?
We have an underground and a tram.
I believe we provide transportation passes for the students.
We do.
Is that the same transportation pass, tram and
they can
underground?
use it on anything that they like, including the suburban railway. So it's a very practical thing that students have with them. They don't have to look for tickets. They don't have to, they can hop from any means of transportation as they wish. We don't have that much traffic downtown, so that's a good thing.
More of a pedestrian city, you would say?
More of a pedestrian city, increasingly more of a biking city.
Excellent.
So those who want to do some biking, there are increasingly more useful biking routes that can take you between home and work.
Would you say that the transportation's clean, timely?
Yes, I think it's both clean and timely, and more importantly, very affordable.
We talked about this a little bit, but locals, what's a word you use to describe locals?
Careful.
Like you said, they ease into relationships with people with caution.
Fair.
Yeah.
Fair, not judgmental.
Kind of quiet.
It's kind of more introverted, but introversion is not always bad.
Language.
Musical, melodic. Strange, for sure.
Yeah.
And lots of points, umlaut, what we call 𝗍 and 𝗍, and lots of vowels.
You guys use the same alphabet as us, or different?
Absolutely, we have the Latin script. However, we have lots of vowels in Hungarian. Okay. More vowels than you think. There's an A and an A with an accent, E and an E with an accent, an O with an accent, and O with a dot. So we have about 9 vowels. And
all different sounds.
We use them to work. We put them to work.
Landmarks.
I'd say the castle. At the hill of the Buddha is the Buddha Castle, which used to be the seat of the Austrian-Hungarian monarchy, and now a great area to see. There is the picture gallery to explore, and you can get a great panorama of the entire city, including the river, if you climb about 10 minutes, not too steep, and you get to the castle area where you look at the entire city.
Is there a lot of, we didn't really talk about this, but in terms of like something for like the outdoorsman or outdoorswoman, is there access to hiking? I know you said biking is big in the city, but things like that. What are some of those activities that people do around or outside of the city?
Yeah, so this is one of the bigger advantages of being in Budapest is very easy access to great nature. From caves to relatively high jumps, you can find that. You can bicycle on the banks of the river. And you can actually go to this very picturesque little town, artistic town, by cycling. And there's a whole cycling road that is devoted to that. And we take students to a hiking and biking trip as part of our program to a part of the country that we call the lake region. It is one of the biggest lakes in Europe. Depending on the season and depending on the time of the weather, or the kind of the weather, the students can also kind of dip in to the nice green waters of the Lake Balaton.
Nice.
And this is a city that is away from the sea.
Right.
It's a landlocked country, but they love water sports. So you will find a lot of canoeing, kayaking, both on the river and the river tributaries. You will find sailing in some of the lakes in the country. Biking, as I said, is very popular, but hiking is probably was a lifesaver in this last year.
Yes.
That we globally went through, to have such an easy access to great nature and fresh air.
Yeah, so you're living in a city, right? Budapest is pretty street. You have your public transportation, your underground, things of that nature. But just a few kilometers outside of the city, you have your access to lakes, hikes, all of that stuff. Do you guys do like an excursion or a day trip where you are hiking or doing any of those water sports?
We have a weekend trip that we put students on bikes, and then we bike on the Lake District and do a bit of hiking the next day. Neither of them are very, very exhausting.
Right.
And depending on the requirements of the group, we also kind of adjust the intensity of the hiking and the biking. Right. So there is space for everyone, depending on their fitness level. But this is a very outdoorsy program. So people who like the outdoors, they're going to definitely enjoy this program.
Very good. Architecture.
We call this style 𝗟𝗘𝗧'𝗦, which is more commonly known as Art Nouveau. It is a special Central European style with lots of picturesque natural leaves and branches that are portrayed on building facades. It's very, very pretty to see them, and there's a unique style. But I also would add maybe the very colorful roof tiles that you will find in the center of town.
Pastel colors. Is that kind of?
They're actually very lively colors.
Yeah.
Yeah, your oranges and greens and strong blues, and when the sun kind of hits the right way, the mosaics and the little roof tiles really gleam in the sun.
Is that a long-standing tradition with architecture in Budapest, or is that kind of more like on the newer wave of preserving some of these buildings and levels of architecture?
I would say we were sort of lucky, unlike some European cities. We were never quite bombarded during the war to the level of some more Western European cities and some of our neighboring cities. So there is a lot of preservation of pre-World War II architecture. And it is a unique Hungarian style, which converges both sort of the elevated architectural style of Paris with Hungarian folk design. So it is a mixture of the two.
It's a mixture of folk and then like Parisian style.
Parisian style, absolutely.
I like that. Very cool.
Big avenues with little town squares.
Yeah. So you have like the little cobblestone streets still, or is it all pavement?
There is some cobblestone streets here in the Buda side. I live on Buda, and this is a slightly more older, more medieval part of town is over here. Pest is much more kind of 19th century, kind of this grand Parisian style of big avenues and kind of these big buildings with columns and whatnot.
So it's literally the name of the city split in the middle. You have Buda and then you have Pest. I like that. And the students are, their housing is in Buda or Pest?
They study in Pest, they live in Pest.
And they visit you in Buda, so they have the best of all worlds. Very cool. And then last question for you, Deniz. So as a resident director, students are always learning from you guys in that position. You're kind of the guru, the know-all. You're going to show them all the cool spots. But what's something that you, throughout your time as a resident director, have learned from the students?
I have learned from the students to be perhaps more observant, because in this last 15 years, as I become more localized, I don't quite see the differences between Budapest and some of the other cities, and they're always reminding me of their preference from Budapest after they come back from Prague or Vienna. And I gain a more appreciation for the city after I talk to the enthusiastic, words of students, especially returning from a trip from abroad.
So we are all done today. So thank you so much. How do you say thank you in Hungarian?
Köszönöm.
Köszönöm.
Köszönöm. It's K.
Köszönöm. Excellent. And then you told me how to say goodbye, and the shorter version.
The longer version is 𝗦𝗢𝗖𝗓 and shorter version is 𝗦𝗢𝗧.
𝗦𝗢𗢑, that's right.
𝗦𝗢𝗢.
Awesome. Well, until next time, and hopefully we'll get you with your students again, and everyone will be reunited very soon. So in the meantime, we will see 𝗦𝗢𝗧. Is that right?
𝗦𝗢𝗧.
𝗦𝗢𝗧. All right, perfect.
𝗦𝗢𝗧.
Bye, Deniz. 𝗦𝗢𝗧.
Bye. Bye, everyone.